Okay, I'm finally back to work on the Corsound 15, and I worked all day yesterday, and I got the inside seam in the cockpit filleted and taped. I also got the aft cockpit bulkhead glued in and glued the beam across the top to support the seat tops. And today what we're going to do is show you some new parts that I got, and I've already put some together, and we're going to get the seat tops fitted into the boat, and the next thing will be to glue in the centerboard trunk and glue in the hatch rings for the hatches for the cockpit. Okay, this is the centerboard trunk assembly, and the trunk comes as two plywood pieces that get glued together, separated by the king's posts here. We've got one in the back and one up in the front, and then along the top there's the two rails that stiffen the top edge of the trunk itself. The first thing I did was put a layer of fiberglass on the inside of the panels and sanded that smooth and put a coat of epoxy on it, so that's really well sealed. You're not going to be able to get at that, so you want to make sure you get a good layer of glass and epoxy on it. Some people put graphite powder in there, but I didn't bother. And then I milled these end blocks, and I milled a few extra lengths of it that I can slip down in there as spacers to keep this width exactly the same when I glue this in. And the 15 trunk has a thwart beam that goes across there, and the forward thwart has a notch there, and the forward beam will go through that notch. And so I just glued this up. I didn't make a video of that, and so I've got it sanded down now, and I'm going to give this 2 or 3 coats of epoxy before I bother gluing it in, because once it's vertical like this, it's going to be really hard to sand. Also I've rounded over all the edges that need rounding. And another thing I'm going to do is glue on the centerboard pivot pin doubler that goes on here. It's this piece here. So there's a doubler on either side that glues on there, and you'll want to round that nicely. And then you'll drill out the hole for the pin, and then this is just a cap, and the cap will sit over there with 3 screws, and you'll just put some bedding compound down when you install this with your 3 screws, and that lets you knock out the pin if you ever need to remove the centerboard. That's how that works. So I'll get this coated up today, and we'll get it glued into the hull. Okay, this is one of my seat top parts, and I've got 2 of these for the back and 2 pieces for the front. And the first thing I did when I got it is I put a coat of epoxy on it. And I find when coating plywood, I usually do a first coat real thin. You don't want to have glossy puddles all over the place, so the trick there is just lots of rolling with a thin foam roller. And I just get 1 coat of epoxy on there, and then I sand it smooth with 80 grit sandpaper, and then I can do the next 2 coats, one right after the other, you know, just after it starts to gel, and then you're done. So that way you only have to sand it once, and I've never had a problem doing it that way. And then when I get ready to glue it into the boat, I'll obviously sand an inch or 2 all the way around the edges, anywhere where it's going to be glued to a mating face before I glue it, but the underside will be done. So this part will go back here. It's one of the aft benches, and so I've got all the seat top parts with the first coat, and today I'll sand that first coat smooth and get on with the sealing coats. Okay, here's the other pieces to the seat top. These are the forward sections as well as the plywood thwarts. And For the kit, we've gone to using plywood thwarts just because it's easier. You don't have to laminate up the thwart, and we'll put beams underneath, and this will be a solid hardwood piece here where the mast goes through. And just like the back parts, I've already coated these pieces, and I've glued in the butt block to just the outer panel, not the thwart. I've glued that on so that I can lay the thwart on there, and I've temporarily clamped all these pieces together, and I've checked the diagonal, and so I can dry fit this into the boat and trim it along the edges if it needs any trimming, and get it dry fitted and get the aft one dry fitted. Okay, I'm dry fitting the aft section of the seat tops, and this is where the hatch cutout is, and these two pieces join together at the back side of the hatch. And so when you dry fit this, I had to notch the back end to accept the transom stiffener, but the kit will have that pre-notched, and I had to do a tiny little bit of adjustment here to take away the thickness of this fiberglass so this would fit back perfectly. And I also had to take out a little bit of material along this back edge because my side panel was bent in slightly more than in the computer model, and every boat is going to be slightly different in that regard. Okay, this is one of the hatch rings, and I've already assembled them, but all the pieces for the hatch ring, except for the hardwood, is pre-cut on the machine for you. And the way I put this together was just on a flat table. I put all the plywood parts together with a hot glue gun using tiny little dots of hot glue, and then I put the fillets inside of the hatch ring, and then I cut these hardwood pieces out. I'm not sure if those are in the kit or not, but anyway, they're pretty simple pieces to cut out, and they're glued onto the bottom of the ring, which is a pre-cut U shape. And I've also glassed just this inside corner all the way around here, because it's just a plywood joint there with a fillet on the inside, so it's a little bit weak, or can be a little bit weak if it got hit wrong, and so I chose to glass it. And so there's the channel all the way around for the hatch. And so when I glue this in, I'll just be gluing this face here into the inside of the longitudinal bulkhead, and then the top of this outer rim here gives a good gluing surface to the underside of the seat top. Okay, here's the actual hatch itself, and the assembly was the same. I just kept it on a flat table and put the parts together with small dots of hot glue, and then I filleted the underside corners, and I glued down this backing piece of hardwood that's going to accept the piano hinge screws. And I have seen on these hatches sometimes this outer edge between the front face and the top, you can develop a small crack right there. So I chose to just glass the hatch with a very thin fiberglass, and I just sanded it smooth. And this is going to get 3 coats of epoxy on the inside. Obviously the outside, now that it's glassed, is sealed up, and then this will be ready to be primed and installed. And you can see it fits perfectly right down into our hatch ring. And there's your waterproof hatch, so you'll put your neoprene gasket or weather stripping up underneath the inside, and when that closes, it mashes around that rim. And so there's the hatch assembly. I've got 2 of these, and those will get glued in today. The next thing I'm going to do is sand the edges of the glass taping and just smooth out the bottom of the boat from any little epoxy drips, and then I'll get a coat of epoxy in this inside cockpit area, and I'm just going to use my random orbital sander with the vacuum attachment for most of it. But I also wanted to show you this little guy, one of these little Black & Decker mouse sanders. These things are really great. They're super cheap, and they can get into corners. And this one I've adapted. It comes with this little black filter piece that's really useless, and I've cut the back off of it and hot glued on a block of plywood with a hole so that it will accept my my size vacuum attachment. But man, these are really cheap and do a great job. I recommend getting one for getting into corners, and with the vacuum attachment, the sandpaper lasts a lot longer. Another trick is if you don't want to buy these little triangle fitted sandpaper pads, you can just put your regular old disc pads on there, and they work just fine, and they make a nice point just like the others. And you can move these around so that you sometimes you wear out the front tip faster than the back, so you can flip it around and really get the most out of each piece of sandpaper. So that's a little trick I use. I just finished coating the inside of the cockpit, and so I sanded it, and then I gave it a coat of epoxy, and tomorrow I will sand it smooth, and then it'll get 2 more coats in the cockpit before the centerboard trunk goes in. It's a lot easier to do the coating before you have the big centerboard trunk in the way. And likewise, I'm coating the centerboard trunk with 3 coats before I put it in, because for the same reason it's hard to sand it when it's in there. I've also got my hatch rings glued in now, so they've been coated on the underside, and I've got a beam clamped across so it's touching the stringer, the back edge of the hatch ring, the side of the hatch ring, and then the top of the longitudinal bulkhead. And that keeps, I got one on each side, and that's keeping the top of the hatch ring in plane with the top of the stringers, so that it will be flat when we glue the seat top down. So the seat top will be glued to this outer edge all the way around. And then I've got a couple little props here because I had a little gap that I'm closing on the front edge, and then I also have a prop down here that's propped off of the side of the boat. And the reason I did that is just to, if you see here with a straight edge, was just to bring this front edge of the hatch into a straight line. Had a little bit of a arc to it. The longitudinal bulkhead itself has an arc to it, but the hatch is straight across, and so it's a little bit of an approximation. You know, from here to here is a straight line, so it's just, I didn't really have to do that. The hatch still would have worked, but just to make it straight. And then if you're working by yourself, I did this side. I pre-screwed into the top of the flange here, which you won't have to fill because you're just going to glue the seat top over that. And so by pre-screwing those straight edges down, I could lay it down in there and then push it forward with the glue. So it was easy to do one-handed. And it's always a good idea to get as much of a fillet as you can. So I don't know if you can see this, but I tried to get a fillet down around the edge of the hatch ring. I tried to put a small fillet. It's a pretty small fillet, about a 1/2 inch radius. But just to fill that in, it's always better to try to get a fillet on something than to put a hard corner. So those are the hatch rings, and I've also got these last 2 little cleats glued onto the transom, and I just used a prop as a clamp to avoid a screw hole. And so once I get the trunk coated, we'll be gluing the trunk in. In the kit, the longitudinal bulkhead will be cut out for the hatch, but you'll still run the stringer all the way across so that the longitudinal bulkhead doesn't have a hard spot in it right here. If you don't run the stringer all the way across, it won't bend evenly when you bend it into place. So what you'll do is cut the stringer about 1 inch or so back, whatever your hatch ring width ends up being. You'll cut that stringer back notch it back, but leave the plywood of the longitudinal bulkhead there, and then you'll just cut into there and then knock on it from this side with a chisel, and that little square will just pop right out. So you will have to pop out those little squares of stringer, but it's really easy to do. I've got the centerboard trunk fitted into place, dry fitted, and when I had the seat tops on, I marked the position of these thwart beams here and here, but in your kit there will be a dado in the longitudinal bulkhead that will mark exactly where those beams should go. This is the beam here, and so you'll cut them to length, and it will just notch into that little dado that'll be cut about halfway through the plywood, and that'll give you the position of the beams, and then using that you can dry fit the trunk. So the one beam goes there, there, and then a beam here that's actually split because this centerboard trunk rail runs all the way forward, and then the forward beam runs all the way across. So I'm just getting it dry fitted, and I'm just using squeeze clamps to hold everything together. And my extra spacer stick I've got stuck down in there as a snug fit in the trunk, and I'm using that to make sure that the front edge of the trunk is plumb. And I'm also going to do the same thing at the back of the trunk, because this is your opportunity to remove any twist that you might have. You know, if the back end it has just a slight amount of twist, that's gonna affect how the centerboard fits in the trunk. So pay attention to this part and measure the plumb in the front and the back, and mark those positions on these rails, and then when we glue the trunk in, we'll recreate this setup and run our fillet and tape around the bottom edge of the trunk. And then when we eventually flip the boat over, we'll run a flush trim bit from the underside to open up the actual trunk hole. So that's it for today, and we'll keep working on it.